Welcome to the Atlas Network. Today we're stepping into a world shaped by one massive what if. What if Russia never became communist and instead embraced capitalism? How different would the 20th century look? How powerful would Russia be today? And how would the entire world map shift because of that single decision? But before we jump in, let me know something in the comments. Where are you watching from? It's always incredible to see how far these videos reach. Now let's begin. Imagine a world where Russia never descends into revolution. No Lenin, no civil war, no Soviet Union. Instead, the Russian Empire stumbles, but reforms before it collapses. And out of the chaos of the early 20th century, a capitalist superpower rises in the East, one that changes the entire course of modern history. To understand this alternate world, we start in 1917, the moment everything diverges. In our timeline, Russia was exhausted by war, famine, corruption, and impossible military losses. But here, the Tsar listens to the pressure building under his feet. He steps aside earlier, handing power to a reformed constitutional monarchy based on the British model. Duma politicians, industrialists, generals, and young technocrats unite around a simple idea: modernize now or die later. The Bolshevik movement still exists, but without the total collapse of the state, it never gains enough support to overthrow the government. Lenin becomes a fringe figure in Swiss exile, rather than the architect of a new world order. Russia remains on the Allied side in World War I. There is no Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Eastern Front doesn't collapse. Germany faces pressure from both sides until the very end. The post-war settlement looks different, and the world's biggest land empire remains intact. By the 1920s, Russia turns its attention inward. Instead of centralized planning and collectivization, it embraces private industry. British, French, and American firms flood into St. Petersburg and Moscow. Rail networks expand across Siberia. Oil fields in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Arctic turn into gold mines for both Russian investors and Western banks. A fun twist of fate: Russia's industrial boom arrives decades earlier than in our world. By 1930, Moscow resembles a hybrid of Chicago and Tokyo. Skyscrapers, electric rails, and corporate districts rising where Soviet brutalism never appears. The global political landscape shifts too. Without communism spreading from Moscow, Europe never experiences the same ideological panic. Far-right extremism in Germany grows slower without a red threat to rally against. Hitler still rises, but weaker, less unified, and facing a Russia that is far more stable and far more prepared. When the Second World War erupts, Russia enters not as a paranoid authoritarian state, but as a modernizing capitalist power with a reformed military, strong alliances, and Western partners. Germany still invades eastward, but the campaign collapses quickly. Russian industry, fueled by private capital and modern logistics, produces tanks, aircraft, and artillery at a scale Nazi Germany cannot match. Berlin falls faster, the war ends earlier, and the Cold War never happens. Instead of a world split between capitalism and communism, the post-war era becomes a competition between two massive capitalist spheres, an American-led West and a Russian-led Eurasia. Russia now oversees an economic zone stretching from Eastern Europe to Central Asia, a landmass packed with resources, energy, and a growing consumer base. The world's largest oil reserves? Controlled by a capitalist Russia. The world's largest gas reserves? Also Russia. The world's longest rail networks? Once again, Russia. By the 1950s, Russian GDP explodes. In this timeline, Russia becomes the world's second largest economy, not China. Its GDP in the modern day reaches around $20 to $25 trillion, built on oil, gas, metallurgy, aviation, heavy industry, and rapidly advancing tech. Cities evolve completely differently. Moscow becomes a megacity of finance, innovation, and aerospace. St. Petersburg turns into a cultural and technological capital, attracting scientists, writers, traders, and engineers from across the world. Novosibirsk becomes the Silicon Valley of the Eurasian interior, built around early computer development and wide-open land. A fun fact: because Russia remains open to global markets, the space race starts earlier. Instead of the Soviet Union launching Sputnik, Russia does, but with Western corporate cooperation. Space becomes less ideological and more commercial. By the 1980s, Russian rockets dominate satellite launches, and joint ventures with American and European corporations become normal. China's story transforms too. Without communism spreading from Moscow, Mao never gains momentum. China remains fractured longer, industrializes slower, and never becomes the continent-sized economic rival it is today. In this world, China's GDP ends up somewhere between $5 and $8 trillion, significant but dwarfed by the Russian-led Eurasian market. Europe experiences a quieter century. Without the Soviet threat, NATO forms later, smaller and weaker. The US still becomes a superpower, but its influence isn't global by default. Russia becomes its peer rather than its enemy. The two compete for trade routes, aerospace dominance and technological breakthroughs, but rarely for ideology. Russian daily life in this world feels surprisingly familiar to modern Europeans. Private businesses flourish. Entrepreneurs rise faster without state repression. A large middle class forms early. By the 1990s, Russia becomes one of the world's top tourist destinations. Iconic cities, modern infrastructure, and an empire-sized economy all wrapped into one. Rail travel becomes legendary. The Trans-Siberian Railway turns into a high-speed corridor connecting Europe to the Pacific in under 24 hours. Siberian cities boom thanks to investment, not neglect. Yakutsk, Irkutsk, and Vladivostok turn into industrial and technological centers. Militarily, Russia becomes enormous, but organized and well-funded instead of bloated and backward. A professional army of 2 million soldiers, the largest air force outside the United States, a navy with multiple supercarriers operating from the Arctic to the Indian Ocean. And unlike the Soviet military, this force remains supplied by a booming capitalist industry, not a bankrupt command economy. By the 21st century, global power looks completely different. Instead of a US-China rivalry, the world becomes shaped by the US-Russia rivalry. Two massive capitalist giants competing not to destroy each other, but to out-innovate each other. Technology reflects this competition. Russia develops early supercomputers, advanced robotics, and massive AI projects centered in Moscow and Novosibirsk. Energy markets revolve around Russian pipelines, Arctic drilling, and Central Asian investments. Europe becomes wealthier by integrating deeply with Russian trade, while Asia aligns economically with Moscow unless it aligns with Washington. The biggest surprise of this world, Russia becomes one of the most multicultural powers on Earth. With its empire intact, dozens of ethnic groups and regions become deeply tied into the economic core, not oppressed by ideology, but elevated by economic integration. The world map looks familiar at a glance, but the balance of power is completely reshaped. A capitalist Russian empire stands as a global titan, wealthy, stable, technologically advanced, and powerful enough to define the entire Eurasian continent. A single question echoes across this alternate world. What does the 21st century look like when the largest nation on Earth never turned red, but turned capitalist instead? And that brings us to the end of this alternate timeline. If you enjoyed the journey, hit the like button. It helps more than you think. And if you want more deep dives into the worlds that could have been, make sure to subscribe to the Atlas Network. Let me know in the comments what if scenario you want us to explore next. Your suggestions decide where we go from here. Thanks for watching.